We have a complete different donor population, yes, for sure. But I found out some other members who would be willing to talk about it. And in 2013, John Kapashikawa and I built up this very wonderful consensus meeting on primary graft dysfunction that now really, I think, sets the stage. I think definitely as cardiac surgeons, this is not the way how to select. So if you take out the donor heart and look at the recipient heart, they should be different. They should look the same, bad. And then everybody who has done transplant, you know how these hearts look like that you take out of these poor patients. Very important in everything what you do, Europe is different. We do not have only a lot of different languages than the US. We are a very, very mixed population also in the US, but our donor age is significantly older than in the US. And this is data from the ISHLT, not completely new, but it hasn't changed. It's still the same. You will read it in the next part of our registry. So it's about median age of 40 years. These are the donors that we accept. In the US, it's still lower. Reasons are known, different. Again, data from the ISHLT registry clearly show ischemic time has an impact on death after transplantation, early death, and this is also associated with donor age. So the higher the donor age, the longer the ischemic time, the higher the risk that these patients won't survive over the first year. And looks very nice and pretty clear, but when you look at this is just my personal experience, this is our median donor age in Vienna, 44.5 years, and we're going now up to 60, 62 years. So we're already in the high risk. And we looked at about the median ischemic time in our donor transplant population. You can see the median ischemic time today is 4 hours, which was normally said this is the upper limit of an ischemic time. So we are almost always in the high-risk population, and we struggled in the mid-2000s with a high rate of primary graft dysfunction. So the questions, could the standard of heart transplant preservation be improved? Yes, of course, yes, always. We heard a lot about different new technologies. There are some new preservation solutions on the horizon. And here, because this is, of course, the Paragonix lunch symposium, talking about the SherpaPak, which you have this wonderful picture here, and you have this very nice gadget that you exactly know where your team is going if they're taking the shortest route back from the hospital. And of course, you have this temperature log that you really see this heart is really at the same temperature. But when we started to use it, I immediately had a lot of discussions with Mrs. Anderson about, so if you want to really get this started, you need to work on science. Even though you are approved, everybody can buy it, can use it, you need to work in science to convince the users, us, to use it. And I can't thank you enough, Lisa, for doing that you really put together this registry, the Guardian Registry that was started, I think it was the kickoff in 2019 at the last ISHLT meeting where we were sitting face to face with each other. And look at that. So the enrollment, it took some time to enroll patients, but now we are more than 1,000 patients are included in this Guardian Registry. Partly preserved with the SherpaPak, partly preserved with static storage on ice. So, and I said, well, we have to do some granularity work in that. So giving you some retrospective historical analysis, so when we started to use the SherpaPak, said, okay, we will use it in the absolute high-risk population with high-risk donors. And just to give you some insight, recipient median age almost 60, most of them were male. The indications for transplant are typical, but so 1/3 of our population are VAD patients, but we also had the HeartMate 6 total artificial heart, where we preserve the heart with the Sherpa. 10% were ECMOs, so we do not have the allocation rules in the US. ECMO, we are one of the few centers who are really aggressive in ECMO bridge to transplantation. And 2/3 were high urgent. I would say that's 1 to 3 in the new allocation classification of the US. And even 21% of those patients had an infection pretty close to the transplant. So if you are familiar with the IMPACT score, which is a recipient risk score, validated to predict 1 year mortality after transplantation, those were 8, so it predicts around 17 to 20% mortality, which is a high-risk population. The same with the donors, and this is a European donor population, 40 years median age, norepinephrine, all of them received norepinephrine. There were 40% more than 0.2 micrograms, and 2 inotropic or vasopressor drugs, at least in 15% of these donors. We had some rate of patients with less than 50, donors with less than 50% ejection fraction, 20% are hypertrophic hearts, hypernatremia in 20%, and 40% of these donors were under CPR, with half of them a CPR time above 20 minutes, and an ischemic time, a median ischemic time of 201. These were selected. Not all of our patients, not all of donors are like that, but we selected the highest risk, and about half of them were more than 240 minutes. So we have the Eurotransplant donor risk score that predicts acceptance or non-acceptance of a donor heart in the European and in the Eurotransplant area. So it would be an estimated non-acceptance rate of 40%. So 40% of these hearts normally would not be accepted. And the donor risk index, again, an American donor risk index, expected mortality of 20%. Well, we had a primary graft dysfunction rate of 10% in this population, and in hospital mortality of 20%, most of them due to infection. So high risk. Of course, this is something that you might not be able to do in the US because the UNOS Grim Reaper is always in your neck. In Europe, it's a little bit easier, but we have this different donor population. Based on that, we also work now on our Austrian experience. As you can expect, these patients had a long stay in the hospital and on the ICU, but what we could see some kind of primary graft dysfunction lower rate when we used the Sherpa and in a routine way, and not only in these high-risk patients. And exactly that was by coincidence also in the pandemic time when it started. So we saw some lower rates of primary graft dysfunction, not exactly severe, but lower rates of primary graft dysfunction and less use of ECMO. So that we thought, this is pretty interesting, and we were really looking forward what's going on. What will the SherpaPak have an impact? What will the Guardian Registry say? And I think a lot of you were when we heard yesterday the first data, or it was on Wednesday the first data about our one-year transplant survivals, and I think this is one of the most intriguing slides. So showing U.S. centers with their standard of care in the old times, the risk for severe primary graft dysfunction defined as you cannot wean a patient of bypass without a mechanical support, and how this changed when the Sherpa was implemented. So you can see none of them had an increase, all of them had a decrease. And of course, some centers were very good before that, but they're now very good after that. But some of them really seem to have a problem with around almost 30% primary graft dysfunction. They really could lower this incidence. But we said, okay, the problem is you might compare apples to oranges if you have not a prospective randomized trials. And I insisted when I discussed with Paragonix and also my co-workers from the Guardian Registry, we need to have something as close as it can get to a prospective randomized trial. Well, you have to do a propensity score matched cohort and compare it, the ICE preservation and the SherpaPak preservation. And working on that, where we looked, okay, we tried to balance out the ischemic times, the area distribution, because there was this change of the allocation rules in the US, and also the size distribution of the center. And with that, we found out, not we, but the computers found out almost 150 patients in each cohort that we could compare as close as it gets to a prospective randomized trials. And very interesting, so it was balanced in the ischemic time, it was balanced in the area. Still the discussion, well, a little bit difference in the mechanical assist devices, and you heard from the PGD consortium that durable VATs might be associated with a higher rate of primary graft dysfunction, but we will work in that direction, so we will put this variable also into place. But to our astonishment, or to our surprise, positive surprise, we found out there seems to really to be a significant impact when using the SherpaPak in behalf of severe primary graft dysfunction. We know that patients mostly do not die due to primary graft dysfunction itself. Hearts can recover, but we know they die of the collateral damage of infection, multi-organ failure. So I think it also had an impact on one-year survival. And in the Kaplan-Meier analysis now with this huge patient population, we could show that there's a significant difference when using the SherpaPak compared to ICE. We also looked at what happens in these longer distance, more than 4 hours of ischemic time. It seems to have even a bigger impact there, that the difference was even more significant. And this also had some impact on 1-year survival after transplantation. We also did an analysis in marginal donor hearts, and I always say, well, the marginal donor heart in the US is the routine donor heart in Europe, but this Guardian Registry is still very US focused because not that many European centers have put the data in. We have done. And we use this similar definition of a marginal donor heart based on more than 4 hours of ischemic time or more than 2 hours plus one of the following comorbidities. So older donor, longer donor downtime with CPR, history of diabetes, impaired ejection fraction, hypertrophic hearts, and donor luminal irregularities on the coronary angiogram. And even here, we could see a trend and partly also a significant difference between those two donor populations. So I think we need more data to show it also in these marginal donor hearts, but there's a lot of data out there, and everybody who wants to cooperate in the Guardian Registry, you're happily invited to work with us to get more insight into the data. We also have our first information and data on the pediatric experience. Of course, the numbers are small, so we cannot say anything in any significant impact, but we could see, based on this population, there seems to be some benefit also in these pediatric hearts, but we have to wait for more data to see if it really shows up the first signs, if it's really a signal or it's just noise. So overall, I don't talk too much about lungs. There has been also a Guardian lung registry, and they also could show it seems to have an impact. It's pretty new, so I think it will be very interesting to hear about that during the next ISHLT meeting. So in summary, our early experience in high-risk cases was positive. This is why we moved forward. I think the Guardian Registry data shows a strong signal for improved donor heart protection with the SherpaPak. We saw a significantly lower rate of severe primary graft dysfunction in the matched cohort. There was a lower rate for need for mechanical support post-transplantation in the matched cohort. And we could show that longer transport times are possible. There is a potential benefit in marginal donor hearts. There is a potential benefit in pediatric hearts, but definitely more data will be needed, and definitely this will be followed because Guardian is alive and working very well, and I'm looking forward to seeing more of this data in the future. Thank you very much.